If you're ready to take your destiny into your own hands, you've come to the right place. This is The Bulletproof Entrepreneur, featuring interviews with the most exciting and amazing entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Chi Odogu.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the show today. If you love what you hear on today's episode of the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a comment. It helps other great listeners like yourself find the show. And of course, you can always find more episodes of the Bulletproof Entrepreneur podcast at www.odogwu.com. And without further ado, on with the show.
Today's guest is Gary Morton. Gary is a distinguished keynote speaker, consultant, and author. He's a graduate of the famous West Point Military Academy who went on to become a platoon leader and tank commander in the United States Army's renowned Task Force 468. He's also a former VP and general manager of the medical devices manufacturer Stryker. In addition to all that, he's an alum of the prestigious Harvard Business School's executive education program. I'm pleased to have Gary on the show to tell us a little bit about himself, his life, his background, his experiences, and of course his new book, which is titled Commanding Excellence, Inspiring Purpose, Passion, and Ingenuity Through Leadership That Matters. Gary, welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me, Chi. I believe I can share some thoughts and insights that will be valuable to the folks that are listening.
Great. So, Gary, I've mentioned a lot of things here. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I see you went to West Point, and then you also led a platoon in the Army for a few years before you went into civilian life. So tell us a little bit about your journey from Gary, the young man, through West Point and the lessons you learned there, and then some of the lessons you learned as a platoon leader and tank commander in the Army.
Yeah, I feel really blessed with the experiences I had in my early life. I went to West Point. It's the Army version of the military academy. It's been around a long time, a lot of tradition, a lot of great people there, and just had a tremendous experience. It was one of those, a rare school, being a service academy, that there wasn't any graduate programs or PhD programs. So if you were a good student, and I was able to be a good student there, you got to work with the best professors at the academy very closely. And I wrote a number of senior theses. It was just a tremendous experience. And then also there, being a military school, there's a whole another level of experience that you have, which is leading. And you get to lead, follow, see other folks lead, lead your peers, lead subordinates and the underclass as you work your way through there. Really, just a tremendous experience there. And then, you leave West Point and you go out in the Army and you realize how much you don't know. And I was lucky enough. I chose to go armor because I had armor as tanks, and that was the branch that I chose to go because that was really one of the reasons that I decided to go into West Point and go into the Army, because I had visions of being a tank commander and aspirations of trying to do some of those things that those great commanders did in World War II. But anyway, I go out to a unit and, I just get lucky, really, really lucky. You go to a training course after the academy, and then you go out into the regular Army, into a unit. And the unit that I went to was the worst performing unit at the division that it was a part of, and arguably the worst performing unit in the U.S. Army. This is at the battalion level, so it's about 600 people. But we got a new commander because the previous commander was just relieved. So I walk into this unit that's not very well thought of, and really it just have the experience of a lifetime, because 1 year later, that unit goes out to the true test at the time. It's the Cold War, and the test for how good you are and how combat proficient you are is at a place called the National Training Center. And most battalions, you go out and you fight 9 battles there, and you fight against what's called the opposing forces, the OPFOR, and they're good. And they know the terrain, they're high morale, they're handpicked troops, they're always full strength, and they outnumber you 2 or 3 to 1 because they're representing the Soviet Union at the time military, which outnumbered us significantly. So they're hard to beat. A good unit wins 2 of 9 battles. A really good unit wins 3. One time, a unit won 5 of the 9, and the Army studied that. We, again, worst unit in the Army, 1 year later goes out, we go 9-0.
Wow.
in every single engagement out there. And so not only did the Army study it, we changed doctrine. And the way that things happened at the small unit level, in the maneuver battalions and at the company level, in the operations in Kuwait and Iraq over the next 20 years were influenced in a fairly significant way by what we achieved and what we accomplished there at the National Training Center.
Now, what caused such a radical change? I know you mentioned the change in leadership, that you got a new commander, but how did that filter down from having a new commander all the way through the ranks, and what were the little ingredients that led to the big results that you guys achieved in just 1 year?
Yeah, that's a great question. This commander really did three things extremely well. One was he established an absolute clarity of purpose. And by that, I mean that it was absolutely certain within that organization what was important, what was most important, and what was unimportant. And that is key to a clarity of purpose. It's not just about what is important, but it's also about those things that we're not going to be great at. And for us, it was, we're going to go 9-0 at the National Training Center. Now, that seemed like an absurd goal at the time, but then he aligned all the rest of the systems and processes within the organization to do that. And things that were unimportant, like, for example, there was a big change of command ceremony, and in the Army, that's a big deal. Yeah. So there's a new assistant division commander that came in, and all the other battalions were practicing for their out on the parade field for days to try to look good in front of this new division commander or new assistant division commander. Well, we knew that wasn't really going to help us go 9-0 at the National Training Center. So we couldn't be horrible, because then they'd put a lot of scrutiny on us and say, what's wrong with this unit? But we practiced one time, and one time was enough to be good. Yeah. Good enough at what we were doing. And then we focused all of our time and energy and efforts on how to win the battle. And so we did that, absolute clarity of purpose. And then he was able to, through the way that we organized and through the way that we set up ourselves to do the battles, to spread that obsession to achieve that purpose throughout the entire organization, from the private in the mess hall to the company commanders that were leading the tank companies. It was just absolutely tremendous experience of leadership. And then thirdly, he unleashed a level of creativity within the organization that was profound. There were no requirements for people that brought ideas forth, other than that they had the best interests of the battalion at heart. In other words, it could come from the lowest ranking person to the highest ranking person in that unit, but the good ideas won. Mm-hmm. The good ideas went forward. The good ideas got adopted. The good ideas became part of our standard operating procedures, and it was just a tremendous experience. And I described that in this book that I wrote, because the environment that he created, if we could have organizations around the world create those kinds of environments, we can get that kind of performance.
And why is it that many organizations don't follow that pattern? Because it stands to reason that, this commander did everything right, and these things don't seem like they're rocket science. They seem like they're common sense and practical steps that he took to make sure that the team and the unit would perform at high levels. So why is it that it's not common practice across the board in many organizations around the world, or even many other units in the same military force?
Yeah, good question. I think I'd give two answers, two main reasons that it's not common practice. One is we also had this rare environment inside the 4th Mechanized Infantry Division out in Fort Carson, Colorado, which was our higher headquarters unit, and inside our brigade, which was our direct higher headquarters unit, where the higher level leaders gave unwavering support to what our commander was trying to achieve. And that is, it sounds like what you should do if you're a higher level leader, but very few folks can actually do that. Mm-hmm. What we were doing was different than doctrine. What we were doing was kind of counter to what you were taught to do or told to do in certain battle situations in terms of planning for the battle. That we developed a whole number of different systems, but we had support from the top to do that. And it was critical to our success. And they never, when you're doing something different or something that's out there, if that higher level leader just kind of sneers at it or doesn't support it entirely, well, then all those people in your organization that aren't quite on board, well, they feel like they're justified in not coming on board. But when the higher level supports it, boy, it is powerful. And you're able to do things that you can't necessarily do when you don't have that high level support. So that's number one. Probably number two is, and I asked that same question of John Brown, which we haven't gotten to this part yet, but in my business career, I joined a company that grew its earnings at 20% a year for 28 consecutive years, every year and every quarter of every year. And it was another phenomenal experience. But what that CEO responded to that question with was, well, a lot of people don't do it because they're afraid. To put out this goal, this absolutely clear goal, 9-0 or 20% growth. I mean, you're putting it on the line. Yeah. You're telling the world, and you're making it very clear what you're intending to accomplish and intending to do. And a lot of people are afraid to do that.
So the two things I'm learning from this is that, to put it like colloquially, it's like, it goes from the head down. Like, I know there's a term where I live that says the fish stinks from the head down. So if if the fish smells like roses from the top, then the whole fish is going to smell like roses. I'm just trying to make it colloquial and light, but what I'm just trying to say is basically you have to have somebody at the top that understands and already buys into the vision from the subordinate and gives them the empowerment and the ability to take initiative and to take charge to do what they need to do to get things going.
Absolutely. And, if you happen to be that person at the top, then give your people that leeway. If you're a person that is trying to accomplish something unique, then find those kinds of environments that allow you to do that.
Yeah, but you'd also have to worry about, that person at the top started from the bottom sometime. So that person would actually have to be trained and exposed to this type of avant-garde thinking for them to be able to know what to do at the right time to help their organizations succeed in the future. So that's just telling me that basically leadership kind of needs to be taught at the very early stages of life. Like, you had the fortunate opportunity to learn leadership early in West Point, and I do believe that this your military commander must have gone through some type of military school, also like a West Point or something else. So he got that very early, correct?
Yes, he did. As a matter of fact, he was a West Point graduate as well.
Yeah. So I guess my question now would be, do we have a flaw in our educational system where we're not teaching leadership to people, and then we expect young people 20, 30 years in the future become CEOs and executives, and we put them in, or they get leadership positions, but they don't have the skill set and the equipment to be effective leaders?
Well, do we have a flaw in our system? I'm not sure I would go that far as to say, can our system get better?
Okay.
Can the systems around the world get better? Absolutely. I think the consciousness of what great leadership is something that's evolving within society today. And, the explosion of information that's out there, it's interesting how, in the past, when maybe it was harder to get a lot of input or information about how to lead or whatnot, it may have made it easier in some ways to figure it out, because now there's so much out there, and there's so much that's not good about leadership and whatnot. I mean, one of the things we did at Stryker, this medical device company, is we work very closely with an organization called Gallup, and Gallup is we developed a relationship with them because one of the ways that they tried to address employee engagement and selection and retention and attraction of employees to the organization, it was very statistically based. I mean, they studied it and tried to understand what worked and what didn't. And that was, that's what our armor battalion did. That's how we achieved what we did at the National Training Center. We spent a year figuring out what worked and what didn't. And we're very objective about it. And we were very open and honest with each other about, the simulated battle we just fought in training 6 months before the NTC rotation. What worked, what didn't work. Let's go through it. Let's figure out how we're going to make it better. Let's not point fingers at each other. Anyway, getting back to the point. But what Gallup has done, and if we could get more rigor applied to a lot of the information that's out there today, rigor meaning this is statistically validated. This is an experience of outstanding, exceptional organizations. But we get a lot of theory that are not necessarily substantiated by experience or substantiated by a good, solid statistical analysis. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
So that type of another thing we tend to, in a number of leadership approaches, tend to focus on making better what's not ideal or what's not good in a person. And the research would show, and certainly my experiences and most experiences of people that have been in leadership for a long time, is you don't necessarily focus on those things. You focus on what people do great and get them and build an organization that allows them to do more of that.
Great. And so you left these services and then you go into civilian life. Did you jump straight into Stryker from the
I
Army?
did, yes.
Okay, so what were some of the things you learned working in Stryker? What were some of the challenges coming out of a system like the U.S. Army into a corporate structure like Stryker? And then how were you guys able to, apply the lessons you learned in the military to help the company achieve success at all levels?
Yeah. It was, again, just a really unique and special experience for me. I'm coming out of the military, so I've learned how to lead people. I've led a tank platoon. I've been a company XO. I had a chance to be a company commander for a period of time because my commander was ill. So, I learned how to lead people and saw great leadership in this battalion commander, this task force commander that did so well at the National Training Center. But I didn't know business. I'd gotten an MBA, I'd gotten a systems management major, master's basically, or an MBA along the way. But I hadn't been in a business environment. So I transition out, and Stryker gives me the opportunity to start doing something right away. So, okay, you manage projects for the military. We're going to have you manage a project for us. And it happened to be, for the little division that I joined at Stryker, it happened to be their most important project at the time. So I had this tremendous responsibility, which is very similar to what you're given in the Army. And, you're driven to succeed, so you figure it out. There was enough people in the organization and enough smarts, if you will, all around the project teams that I had the chance to lead, that we figured out how to be successful. And you apply those leadership concepts. So I had the opportunity to apply those leadership concepts and those ways of managing a project and ways of managing people in a business environment, and learn the technology of it along the way.
And you were mentioning the 20% year-on-year growth and 20% quarterly growth, correct? Were you part of the team that was driving that?
Absolutely. Okay. Everyone was part of that team. Everyone drove. Everyone had some tie to 20% growth. That was one of the powerful parts of that environment. Everyone felt that they could make a difference. I remember there was a quality inspector that you wouldn't think that this person was tied into the 20% growth objective, but he would be. There was one quarter that it would look like it was in jeopardy. So he knows that the production teams are working real hard to get out everything we need to hit our objective and to satisfy our customers. And he works 26 hours just to make sure we got everything done that we could get done and to hit the objective, because he didn't want to be the person that let it go. Everyone felt that ownership in it. Stryker, there were always things that we could do better. When you're at this pace of 20% growth, you always want more resources. You always want more people. You always want more time. You always want to do things better than you did before. I mean, there's this constant desire to improve, this constant need to improve. And even though we met the goal for 28 years in a row, if we look back, and anyone in that organization at the time, as you look back on any particular period of time, any particular year, any particular project, there are always things that you could have done better. From a global standpoint, we learned a lot in the organization as we evolved. In the beginning of Stryker's history, we weren't very good at bringing the right kind of people into the team. There was a unique environment there, but being able to identify and understand those kinds of folks that are going to fit into this environment was a real challenge. And we weren't very good at it. So we eventually became great at this, but boy, it took a long time and a lot of work and a lot of effort by a number of people. Information systems. We were horrible at information systems. We had all these separate divisions, which was powerful, and part of our culture was focused through decentralization. Yet at the same time, we had all these different MRP or ERP systems running in the same corporation. So it was a mess. Yeah. So when you're growing that fast, there's so many things that you'd like to be able to do better. You don't have the time to do because there are other priorities or other things that or you don't have the people that interfere, and you figure it out later. And eventually, the company got to the point where we were able to do a project. Okay, we're going to do a single ERP implementation for the entire corporation, and we're going to do. We developed this relationship, as I mentioned, with Gallup, so we got a lot better at recruiting and whatnot. So it's a lot of things that you focus on those things you do really well, and over time you're able to stop having the things you don't do well holding you back.
So let's transition over to the book. What inspired you to write the book?
Well, kind of as we've mentioned, I had the chance to be a part of these two extraordinary organizations. I had a chance to start a business at Stryker and grow that to a very significant size for the market that we were in. But it was two just extraordinary experiences, and so I felt compelled to tell the story of it and try to do it in a fashion that provided lessons for other people to learn from, in the hopes that if you read this book, maybe you'll be able to be a part of or create, if you will, your own Task Force 468 or Stryker Corporation and have that kind of performance.
Okay. And I know one of the key things and the key themes we've discussed already is culture. So how can a company or an organization create a culture that inspires, leadership from the bottom up?
Yeah, you establish very clear goals, and they're broad-based, highly visible, whether people are accomplishing the goals or not. You give folks the resources to go out and accomplish them, and then you let them go and go do it. And you monitor it along the way, and you have high expectations, high accountability, and high responsibility, and you get these kinds of results.
And I know you mentioned somewhere in the book is coming out in September next month, in a couple of days, but you mentioned that participation trophies are very bad for leadership. So why is that? Because now the culture is basically, if you watch kids in Little League or in high school, everybody gets a trophy just basically for showing up. And some people have said that gives everyone a sense of entitlement. So why do you come out to say that those type of trophies are very bad for leadership?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's as strong of a statement as that, bad for leadership, but because it depends on the kind of environment you're trying to create. At Stryker, And at Task Force 468, though, the environment was about excellence.
Okay.
And so the intent in the reward system was to reward and recognize excellence and to inspire other people to achieve that. So if everyone gets a trophy because of participation in something, you're not necessarily creating the kind of environment where excellence is what is recognized and rewarded and expected and aspired to throughout the team. Stryker was an absolute extreme in reward and recognition, but it was all about achievement of things that were going to drive 20% earnings growth. We racked and stacked everything, and it was visible. And so your performance was out there and could be measured, compared, looked at versus all of your peers in the company. And you didn't get an award for participating. You got awards for being the best. And it drove people to try to be the best. There was a joke award that was started called the Snorkel Award. It was given to the division that didn't meet their 20% objective in any particular month, or was the lowest in terms of growth in any particular month. And you didn't want the Snorkel Award. It sounds, in today's environment, people would say, well, that's not very nice and not necessarily a great motivator. At Stryker, it wasn't questioned. Whether this award should exist or not, I'm not meeting my objectives, so I get this award and I want to give it to somebody else.
Interesting. And Gary, as we're almost about to start wrapping up, I just have a few wrapping up questions and then we'll have to say goodbye. So one thing for me is that right now, I think millennials make up about 40 to 45% of the workforce. And from the research and the studies I've done in the past, it says that millennials kind of perceive good leadership differently from other generations. Now, would you agree to that? What has your experience been like over the last few years?
Yeah, my experience with the different generations that we worked with was millennials to me, it's a powerful generation because you have a group of individuals that grew up somewhat in the, everyone gets a trophy environment. So there's high expectations for reward and recognition. And you have to recognize that, you have to understand that about the people that are on your team. Yet at the same time, they're technologically proficient. If you give them the reward and recognition that they expect or want or are seeking, boy, it has a powerful impact on it. You can build a team of millennials a lot easier than it is to build a team of baby boomers because they're used to being a part of a team. And you know what? They're used to having adult supervision of those teams because, for most of the millennial, my kids are in that generation. For most of the millennial generation, when they went out to play kickball, they didn't do that with themselves. There was an adult and a coach and all this type of stuff, which there's advantages and disadvantages to that. But what I found is, boy, it's a lot easier in many ways to build a team out of millennials because they're looking for some level of structure, some level of expertise in being able to play the game or being able to do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish in your business. And if you can structure things that way, you develop a team environment and a good camaraderie right away. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question for you, but I found it a fascinating generation to work with, and you led them differently. You have to lead them differently. But if you figure out how to lead that generation effectively, it's a really powerful thing.
And what are some of the signs of a great leader?
Wow, that's a question that we could go on for ages about. But I think that looking at the themes that are timeless, the themes that these two leaders I focus on in commanding excellence are timeless themes. Being able to establish a clarity of purpose in any organization is just critical to success. Being able to then have that very clear purpose and get the rest of the organization to buy into it at a profound, deep, meaningful level is critical to excellence. And then creating an environment of open, honest, direct communication that's focused on being able to do what we're intending to do is, again, a basic, timeless precept of leadership that can create organizations that achieve things that many people believe are impossible.
Based on your experience thus far, do you think that leaders are born or are made? So is there such a thing as a natural leader, or can someone develop the leadership ability over time?
I think that there's a twofold answer to that question. Not everyone can be a leader because of the family background, how they grew up, what they learned, how they developed as a human being. Some people are great individual contributors. Some people are great individual contributors and great leaders, and some people are just, they might not be very good individual contributors, but they could be great leaders. But that doesn't mean that training and development and things like West Point don't count. They count profoundly because, it's just, this happens a lot in business and in organizations today. And people will send to leadership training their worst leader because, well, that person needs help. You actually get your biggest return by sending your best leader to the leadership training. You get the biggest. It's like speed reading courses. When folks that go to speed reading courses, you think, well, I've got this employee, they only read 200 words a minute, so I'm going to send them to speed reading, and you know what? They might get to 600 words a minute, and that's pretty good. That's a threefold increase. But if you take the person that reads 1,000 words a minute, this is kind of naturally a good reader, they might get to 10,000 or 20,000 words a minute, a 10x or a 20x improvement. And leadership training is the same way. If you find those folks that, they have that natural ability to get people to follow them, but you give them the training, you give them the expertise, you send them to West Point, you send them to Harvard Business School or whatever, then the return on that investment will be 10 times the return. Somebody that really doesn't have, it really is an individual contributor and doesn't necessarily have those aspirations to be a leader. Leaders, they want to make other people's lives better. And not everyone is like that.
Yeah. And with that said, we're just about to wrap up. So, Gary, where can people get the book, the new book?
Well, it's going to be at bookstores across the nation on September 5th, Barnes & Noble, across the United States and some international locations. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on 800 CEO Reads if you want to buy it in volume. They've got some good discounts there. And then, iBooks and Kindle and most of the major booksellers, it'll be in there on September 5th. You can pre-order it today. Just search for Commanding Excellence on any of those sites, and it'll come up for you.
Are you active on social media, and what's your website?
Yeah, my website is iGaryMorton.com. And I'm active on LinkedIn and Facebook. I've got an author page on Amazon, and I've got a Facebook page kind of dedicated to Commanding Excellence as well.
Great. And
I'm also on Twitter, and I'm trying to build a Twitter following, so follow me at GaryMorton6.
And how are you finding Twitter thus far? I've not really been able to crack the Twitter code myself.
It's interesting with Twitter. I'm not an expert on social media and anything, but with LinkedIn and Facebook, you're able to, ask your contacts to connect with you right away. And Twitter, I haven't quite figured out how you get people to connect with you on Twitter. It's not as intuitively obvious as it is on LinkedIn or Facebook or most of the other media pages.
Yeah, and I think that's one channel I tend to neglect myself and just stick with Facebook and LinkedIn, just because it seems you can do a lot more with those two platforms. And Twitter, yes, it might be more rapid fire, but I don't know, just preference, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'll link to all the links in the show notes, Gary. It's really been a pleasure having you on board for the last couple minutes to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and obviously the new book, Commanding Excellence. We'll check it out once it comes out on September 5th, correct?
Great.
Great.
Yeah, and gee, in your area, where you are in the world right now, I sure would hope that these lessons from these two organizations that were, they were in the United States, but I think they're applicable across all kinds of organizations and all types of cultures, and I hope they can be of help.
Oh yeah, Gary, they definitely are, because the main problem that we have, especially in Africa, as you've seen in the news, is a leadership problem. We have leaders that once they get into power, they don't want to leave until they're dead. You have presidents that have been in power for 40 years, and then their kids take over and they're in power for another 40 years, and things still stay the same. People dying of poverty and hunger while the ruling family are just enriching themselves. So these are basic problems that all these lessons you shared can be translated and applied to the younger generation that are listening to this podcast, that will take it, ruminate on the subject, and then say, okay, I'll start learning more about this, so that when my time comes, when I am able to crack my way and get into the halls of power, I'll be able to do a better job compared to the people that have come before me. So the principles you've shared today are timeless and they're applicable across the board. It's just letting enough people hear them so that they know that there's a better way to do things, as opposed to what they've seen done over and over again over the years.
Yeah, and the leader that does what you just talked about, they will change the world.
Yeah. Great. So thanks for coming on the show, Gary. I truly appreciate you spending the time.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the show today. If you love what you hear on today's episode of the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a comment. It helps other great listeners like yourself find the show. And of course, you can always find more episodes of the Bulletproof Entrepreneur Podcast at www.odogwu.com.